Sean Haney here with RealAgriculture.com. We're at Farm Tech 2016, and we're in the Real Ag Lounge in our little studio here. And right now we're joined by, fresh off the stage from his morning keynote address, Charlie Arnot. How are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you.
Great. So explain a little bit about what your role is and what you do.
I am the CEO of the Center for Food Integrity, which is a not-for-profit organization dedicated to building trust in food and agriculture. We have 150 different members and project partners ranging from input suppliers, like many who are represented here, farmers like farmers who are here at farm organizations, as well as food processors, restaurants, retailers, state governments, universities, etc. And we'll actually be launching a Canadian Center for Food Integrity later this year.
Oh, great. So a lot of your keynote was about trust.
Correct.
Trust.
Right.
Why is trust, not just in agriculture, but across many industries, why is trust such an issue? Why are we having such a hard time trusting people?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that really does plague all of society, not just agriculture, as you noted. And it really goes back for 4 or 5 decades where we continue to see an erosion of public trust related to violations of trust by public institutions, political leaders, religious leaders, big business, and others. So it's gotten to the point where we almost expect people to violate trust.
Right.
And so then the expectation is, okay, I'm not going to trust you until you can prove to me over time that you are in fact worthy of trust. And because of the change in size and scale and consolidation and the application of technology in agriculture, people now think of agriculture and farming as an institution, and therefore, since they don't trust institutions, they're less likely to trust farming.
Right.
What we frequently hear is, I trust farmers, I don't like farming. And so the opportunity then is, okay, how do farmers overcome that bias, make that personal connection again, so that people can understand their systems have changed, but you can still trust me. I'm committed to doing what's right.
You mentioned some of the iconic misuses of trust. So you mentioned Tiger Woods,
Right.
Jimmy Swaggart. You had the Enron. I remember being in university and being in finance classes and them talking about how Enron is brilliant. Off-balance sheet financing is the way to,
Right.
not so much. It takes a long time to gain trust. You can lose trust
Overnight.
just like this.
Right.
So what are some of the ways to build trust?
The key to building trust in today's agriculture is really to be much more transparent. And that's a challenge in ag because we tend to be fairly private. We tend not to want to share a lot of information. And it's not really that we have anything to hide. It's just that culturally we've kind of been brought up to say, okay, we really don't brag about ourselves. We don't talk a lot about ourselves. We tend to be fairly humble. We tend to be fairly reserved. What happens on my farm is my business. What happens on your farm is your business.
Right.
But in today's environment where anybody who has a cell phone can be a cinematographer, we have to assume somebody's watching and talking about who we are all the time. So if we're not involved in that conversation, we're allowing them to really shape the conversation about who we are and what we do. So the most important thing to do is to really be more transparent and then to really talk about your values. Our peer-reviewed and published model has shown that communicating values is 3 to 5 times more important than communicating facts or science. So we have to kind of turn historically what we've always done in sharing data on its head and be much better about talking about who we are and what we do as people. The best part about that, though, is that farmers are great people. So it's not like we're trying to rehabilitate Charlie Sheen here, right? I mean, you've got really good people that do great things, that help provide food and protect the land and care for animals and do all of these things that consumers really want to like. So if we're involved in that conversation, we're talking about our values, we're sharing our personal stories, and being transparent, we can go a long way to building and maintaining trust.
I was talking to a good friend of our site one time, Dr. Cami Ryan. She works for Monsanto now in St. Louis. And she talked about how we live in an age of conspiracy. Everyone believes in the conspiracy, right? And we talked about how since the assassination of JFK, we live in a time where everybody assumes it's a conspiracy.
Right.
And so even as you're trying to build back that trust and trying to communicate that transparency, it's like, yeah, that's fine, Charlie. I really don't believe you.
Right.
How do you battle that?
Well, part of it is it has to be consistent and has to be sustained over time. One of the things I mentioned this morning is that building and maintaining trust is a generational challenge. And oftentimes farmers and farm organizations will institute a program for a year, and if it hasn't quite fixed all of the problems, then they'll go to something else for the next year. This is something we need to be committed to sustaining over time. And farmers legitimately should expect a measurable return on their investments from their organizations. but they shouldn't expect that completely turning the public conversation about food is going to happen in a 12 or 18-month period of time. Not going to happen. So we need to have this longer-term vision of success and then really be committed to a 20, 24-month action plan with deliverables and metrics so that farmers can see progress is being made, but the solution has not yet been achieved.
Are there farmers somewhere in the world that really optimize this idea or this concept of being transparent?
Well, that's a great question, but I know the lack of trust is fairly universal. I mean, we do work all over the world, and as that change of scale and economies of scale and size and technology have come into farming, that reduced level of trust is fairly universal. Whether it's in Australia or Brazil or Canada or the U.S., we continue to see that erosion of trust, and it's something that collectively we're going to have to work to overcome.
Now, you mentioned size. So in your keynote this morning, you talked about areas of trust and how it pertains to the word size.
Right.
Talk about that.
Well, what we've discovered when we ask consumers, why is it that you are afraid of big? The belief is that the larger the organization, the more likely they are to put profit ahead of public interest. So we wanted to test, okay, what do people actually think or feel about big? What does big mean? And so we gave consumers a variety of different statements. We asked for their level of agreement. And about twice as many consumers agree that large farms or large food companies are likely to put their interest ahead of public interest. And so that bias against big is real, it's statistically valid, and something we know we have to overcome by being more transparent and helping people understand we balance public interest with private interest. There's no reason to apologize for making a profit. People want farmers to be profitable, but they also want them to acknowledge and talk about their commitment to public interest.
You know, we were doing an interview earlier this morning with somebody else, and we talked about how when you go to a farmer's market, farmers that are selling direct to the consumer seem to be much better at telling a story, right? Being a good storyteller like Terry O'Reilly talked about yesterday. Whereas typically, broad brushing this, but larger commercial farms really don't feel comfortable in that setting.
Right.
Why is that?
Well, I think it's not something they've been accustomed to. They don't have that connection. But part of the reason that people like small, they like alternative methods of production is it does give them the opportunity to connect with farmers. That's what they like. It gives them the chance to talk about the farmers, learn more about the farmers' values. That's the opportunity they have in a farmer's market or a venue like that.
Yeah. Some people say, well, if I'm more transparent, really what that's leading to is somebody catching me in that aha sort of moment, sort of like the TMZ. So like, oh, right. Really? That's what you're doing? Well.
Yeah, and so one of the things that we've got to do when we think about becoming transparent, and we've worked with some other companies that have made a real commitment to becoming transparent, and it's taken them a year and a half just to get internal alignment, because if the CEO says one of our corporate objectives for the next period of years is going to be increased transparency, well, then the purchasing department has to go, so what do I want people to know about what I'm buying? And folks in processing have to say, well, are we really comfortable sharing what we're doing here?
Yeah.
And so it really creates those internal conversations about how do we create the kind of alignment we want within our organization to make sure we're comfortable sharing what we're sharing. So it does require you to say, okay, if I'm going to be doing this, I'm okay. It's the old saying, look, if you're going to be naked in a glass house, you better start working out now to make sure you're prepared.
Very true.
And so it's about making sure that your practices and everything you're doing is something you're going to be comfortable with others knowing more about.
How do you feel about the as we become more transparent, though, that those goalposts change, right?
They do.
So what was transparent 5 years ago is different than today.
Oh, no doubt.
Where do you think we're going to be 10 years from now in terms of this idea of transparency?
Yeah, it's a continuous evolution. And the moment we meet one standard, another standard will be set. That's the way the process works. And so part of the frustration that I know that some have is, look, I'm not going to move because as soon as I move, the goalposts get raised again. And that's absolutely true. But if you're not involved in that conversation, if you're not participating in the process, you don't have any ability to shape where the goalposts are going to be. So at least if you're having that conversation, if you're involved in the discussion, you can have a discussion and say, okay, well, we're not ready to go there yet, but we could go here. So let's say that here is where we want to be, and then we can progressively work toward ultimately where we'd like to be, but at least we're making progress, and that will be rewarded.
Yeah. Charlie, it was great talking to you today, and you enjoying Farm Tech?
It's great. Great show. Fabulous show. First time I've been here, an unbelievable setup, really.
Yeah, it's pretty neat to talk to 1,700 people.
It is. Very nice.
Don't get to do that every day. Thanks a lot for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the show.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Cheers.